listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the College Football Week 10 preview for Thursday, October 30th, 2019. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
It's another week of college football coming our way. Hanging in Las Vegas today, Brian Blessing, along with our pal Bruce Marshall from the legendary publication, The Gold Sheet. And Bruce, as we look ahead, let's look behind briefly. And that's at the top of the slate now. LSU, Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, and all of a sudden, look who's sitting in the 5-hole. Penn State, after running that gauntlet in the Big Ten of facing quality defenses, maybe not the best teams, but potential banana peels, beating Iowa, beating Michigan State, and maybe we are getting closer if they take care of business against Minnesota. We'll talk about that, to that showdown, Ohio State and Penn State at the end of the year, and then other guys in there ready to pick up the scraps.
Yeah, and it looks like, to me, it'd be a pretty clear Final Four right now with those first four you mentioned. Penn State now moves into position where we got to at least think about the Nittany Lions, and if they can if they keep winning, then you've got a real showdown against the Buckeyes there on November 23. Now, there's also an SEC showdown next week, November 9. That's the Alabama LSU. It would figure still that the loser of that game, I think, is still in pretty good shape. One other note, because that game is before Penn State, Ohio State, we know the way the polls go. It's if you lose last, it's worse for you. So the loser of Penn State, Ohio State, I think is going to be in more trouble than the loser of Alabama, LSU. Nonetheless, Penn State has maneuvered into position where it's got a shot at this thing. And then, downstream here, maybe we should not eliminate Baylor and Minnesota, although there are lots of one-loss teams ahead of them in the polls. But just in case either of those two keep winning, I don't think it's going to happen, especially with Minnesota. But nonetheless, I think the Final Four looks pretty. I think we have a pretty good idea who's going to be there now.
Yeah, the one goofy scenario I would just throw out there is, winner of the LSU-Alabama game. It's a great game, real close. Somebody wins a dramatic game. Loser doesn't drop that far. And then all of a sudden, the winner's got to still play in the SEC championship game. And the loser, in a weird way, might be sitting in the catbird seat in an odd sort of way if the winner were to get pumped in the SEC championship game. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. I was thinking about that scenario too. And say, Florida and Georgia, we'll talk about that one in a little bit. Winner of that game probably wins the SEC East. And then that would be a real monkey wrench in the SEC title game. And you're right. Because of the screwy way this works, whoever lost the SEC title game might then be out. Then the team that lost this regular season meeting might leapfrog ahead, especially if it's Alabama that loses the game to LSU, although LSU in one of the polls now has jumped ahead. But you're right. If Florida or Georgia has the capacity to really alter this thing too, and that's something we'll want to watch the next few weeks as well.
All right, sir, let's dive in some of the big games. A little Halloween action. How about unbeaten Baylor, number 12, laying 17.5, 18. Total on the game is 55.5. How good do you think Baylor is? And then you have to be wary of coming up is the trifecta, right? At TCU, hosting Oklahoma and Texas.
It's going to get a lot tougher for Baylor in November, and this is still technically in October here. This game Thursday with West Virginia. This will not be one of their tougher games. Although Baylor's had some close calls, could have and should have lost that game to Texas Tech, and needed a last-second field goal to get by Iowa State. Both those games were in Waco earlier. They'll take an unbeaten mark into November because they're not going to lose this one, at least I don't think. Neil Brown is confirming that he wasn't hired in Morgantown for any defensive expertise. The Mounties are allowing 44 per game their last three. They've lost all those. We knew it was going to be a rebuild this year in Morgantown. And Charlie Brewer, Baylor's quarterback, he's 15th nationally in total offense. That's not bad. He's a good playmaker, and he'll have a chance to do some damage here. We had it 41-19 Baylor. I don't think they're going to slow down against these guys, who might be at the bottom of the Big 12 right now. and set itself up for some exciting football in November.
All right, the other game Thursday night, before we do indeed get to the weekend, we're looking at Georgia Southern, App State. App State is laying 15 here. The total on the game is 44.5. And you look at this Appalachian State team, Bruce. Listen, I mean, you roll, you beat who's in front of you, and all of a sudden, though, you get those weight of expectations, and you start looking up, and you read the newspaper in the morning, and you're seeing App State number 20.
Yeah, and as far as the New Year's Six bowls go, and the group of 5 rep, App State's right in the mix there. I guess SMU and Memphis. We'll talk about that one a little bit. The winner there, or the winner of the American, right now might have a little bit of an inside track if it's SMU. The other teams all have a loss there, and Boise's loss recently to BYU has hurt the Broncos' quest in that regard. So App State's got a chance. Now, this is a revenge game for App, which was really whipped last year down in Statesboro, 34-14. However, remember their quarterback Thomas, who was the Sun Belt Player of the Year last year. He was hurt in that game last year. The backup quarterback's really self-destructed. Georgia Southern is okay. They run the option. They've got 3 straight wins. They'll be in a minor bowl somewhere in December, but this is a very athletic App defense, which will be able to shut down Georgia Southern, I think, pretty well. 38-16. We'll take the Mounties over the Eagles here. Keep that unbeaten thing going for App State.
All right, and then we get Friday night, Navy laying a balloon number 27.5 against UConn. The total on the game is 55. We know, UConn has just had a grisly season, but at least they were able to enjoy a W, beating an equally poor UMass team. Do they get a comeuppance because of it in a letdown spot of all things?
Yeah, well, Connecticut, 2 big efforts in a row. Not sure it's up to it, though. It has covered a couple. It covered that game against Houston before rolling on UMass last week. So slight improvement there, but this is going to be really rough against Navy, which leads the nation in rushing at 351 yards per game. Navy, by the way, still thinks it has a chance there in the American to do something, so we'll keep an eye on Navy as we get into November. This will not be a problem. We've had it 42-10 midshipmen. Navy, by the way, also pretty good against the run. They rank 18th nationally, and Mensa, the top threat for UConn, won't have much room to rumble here. So midshipmen roll and set themselves up for some big games in the next few weeks as well.
Hey, the bottom line is it's on the board. There's an opportunity for it. They may not be the greatest games in the world, but I'm curious. We know UMass, how bad they are. They can score. They can't stop anybody. But Liberty's laying 23.5. And Liberty, and you won't say this very often in your life, ran into a little buzzsaw at Rutgers last week. Do they bounce back?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, these guys got boat raced by UConn last week, so there's very few teams that can say that the last couple years. And UMass is, how about this? They rank bottom 130th defensively across 4 major categories on defense. This is the most clear-cut worst defense in the country that I can recall in many years. And Buckshot Calvert, 15 touchdown passes, 0 interception ratio since throwing his last pick on September 7th. So Liberty rolls here, 48-21 up at Amherst. The Flames get back on the win track here.
All right, sir, let's roll on. Actually, on paper, it's a really good football game, and it's Troy and Coastal Carolina. Troy's laying 60.5.
Yeah, and Troy has got to get up off the deck after its loss last week, but they're 8-2 versus the spread off a loss since 2016, so they usually bounce back. They've had a little bit bumpier road this year for Chip Lindsey, the new coach, than some people expected. And this could be a little bit of a challenge against Coastal Carolina, too. But Barker, the quarterback, is back in there, 18 touchdown passes this year. Carpenter, the quarterback for the sophomore quarterback for the Chanticleers, is only making his 3rd start. And Coastal has failed to cover its last 6 at home versus FBS foes. So we'll give Troy a whirl here. 38-28 Trojans in Myrtle Beach.
All right. I got to go to the Pitt Georgia Tech game, not only for this week, Bruce, but for maybe what lies ahead. With Pitt a 7.5-point favorite, it's the total I'm looking at here. Let's call 44.5 the consensus. Pittsburgh, they're more than capable of playing that backyard brawl style of game. It just doesn't seem like one of those games to me. I don't know that Pitt gets all fired up. And the other thing is Georgia Tech, installing a new offense this year. It's taken time. They're not setting the world on fire, but I think this is a team you kind of watch and stood to reason, maybe around this time of year and maybe the back third of the year that the kids will get it and they'll improve. I think this game can go over the total. I just think Georgia Tech, slowly but surely, the offense is going to be better.
It might, and the tough thing about this game is the last time we saw both of these teams, they each played Miami, and whether the stench of the Hurricanes is rubbed off on either of these teams, we will see. The Georgia Tech Miami game was really an oddball game. The way Georgia Tech won, and I think you might have a point. I think this team should get a little bit better down the stretch, although it's hard to tell what the real deal was in that Miami game.
Right,
Miami did so much wrong. And last week, Pitt should have won that game against Miami, really kicking itself for not and Narduzzi should be asking himself some questions too, I think, for some questionable play calling down by the goal line. The one thing we do know is that Pitt's defense is still fully functional, ranks 14th nationally, and I haven't seen enough yet from Georgia Tech's offense to suggest they're going to be able to get anything going here. Maybe, but we'd rather take the Pitt side here. We had it 29-13 in the gold sheet. So we weren't quite as sure this thing could go over. It might. That's a decent argument you've got for that. More so, I think we just want to if at a single digit price, I think Pitt's a pretty good value here.
Yeah, in North Carolina next week. I mean, it's not like they're going bananas looking ahead. All right, Nebraska, Purdue. Nebraska's laying 3. The total is 58. I don't know, Bruce. Both these teams have some grisly losses on their slate.
Yeah, they do, and kind of disappointing both ways here, especially Nebraska. Now, Nebraska, the whole thing looks like a triage station. A lot of injuries. The quarterback, Adrian Martinez, injured again last week against it was Indiana, and then both the backups were banged up versus the Hoosiers, McCaffrey and Verdal, although they did combine for some pretty decent stats. But what happened to the black shirt defense here? It's just something way back in the memory banks. It's not these guys. It's only held Northwestern below 34 points in Nebraska's games in the Big Ten this year. So the defense is really a problem. And even though Purdue has had its own injury problems, I think it's enough to win this game at home after blowing that one to Illinois last week. 30-26 Purdue. Nebraska is yet to cover a Big Ten game this year. So I think we'll stick with that trend through Saturday.
All right, Bruce, how about this one? BC, Syracuse 3. Total on the game is 60. You come off a thump and no disgrace at the hands of Clemson. This should be a breath of fresh air. I will tell you, there's something about those early Saturday games in the Carrier Dome where, 21 points are on the board in the first 5 minutes of the game. This is a different BC team. It's not the run and stop the run kind of BC team here. I don't know that I trust either team, but I do think we'll see points.
Yeah, I think we could. And Syracuse at home here, as long as it doesn't wear those purple pants that looked really stupid last week that Syracuse wore at Florida State. And Dino's team this year is just not that good. I mean, last year we saw Syracuse really make some progress, and with Dungy at quarterback, they could do some things. DeVito has been banged up. He hasn't been all that effective, and this team is back to being pretty one-dimensional. We know BC can run with Dillon. He just became the all-time leading rusher at BC. And we mentioned about Syracuse this year, this offense, I mean, after being very potent, only 23.8 points per game. They rank 114th in rushing, so they're very one-dimensional. They're also 1-6 versus the spread against FBS foes this year. And Grosso, the backup quarterback for BC, doesn't look all that bad with Anthony Brown hurting. And he'll throw against this Orange defense, which isn't all that good either. 31-23 BC. This is actually a Gold Sheet key release on the Eagles at the Carrier Dome on Saturday.
outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. Hey, listen, like anything, right? I mean, nobody's sitting here batting 100%. And this is Buffalo against Eastern Michigan. We talked in great detail last week in the podcast about Buffalo and their game with Central Michigan, and we thought there'd be points in the game, but really thought Central Michigan was going to walk in there and maybe roll out of there with a high-scoring victory. Well, it was a high-scoring victory, but it was Buffalo that got the win, Bruce. And I'm curious, you look at this, and we always talk about the MAC and coaches, and it's a springboard for better things to come. And I'm wondering, it's a play on Buffalo here. Is it a play on Leopold? The guy just knows what he's doing. But also, I think Buffalo gave the indication here. They want to get to a bowl game, and they're not going to go quietly into the night in the MAC.
No, they're not. And I was surprised last week. That was Buffalo's best effort. We were riding Central Michigan, and Buffalo got them. The storyline last week, the backup quarterback Ventrese, 4 touchdowns, 4 touchdown passes. Since he's come in for Myers at quarterback, he hasn't looked all that bad. We know the guys can run. I mean, Patterson's closing in on 1,000 yards, and this rush defense is allowed under 3 per carry. So they're pretty gnarly here. Are
they a different? Let me ask you: are they a different team with Ventrese? Because basically, what they ended up doing, they shut the kid down to save another year of eligibility, is what they did.
Yeah.
And now, so this kid comes in, and they had high hopes for him, and all of a sudden, and they had a team, whatever it was, maybe about 4 years ago, where they actually Tyree Jackson was their quarterback. He got hurt, and I forget the kid's name. I think it was Anderson, possibly. And this kid came in, he was throwing for 400 yards. He was actually more of a pocket passer. And it's almost the same sort of thing where all of a sudden a team that was a run and stop the run team and maybe a low scoring team could be a completely different animal with this kid at the quarterback position.
Yeah, they seem to be. It's given a little bit of a sharper edge. Sometimes you see a backup quarterback doing that. Eastern Michigan at Ypsilanti does not have the same spread mark that it has on the road in recent years. And speaking of that, they still lost that game last week at Toledo after they came back against the Rockets, but they fell short. Their quarterback Glass returned last week. Bottom line, we took Buffalo 28-21. I think it's right. Leopold, we know what he can do. By the way, if I'm Rutgers and I'm looking for a coach, I'm going to give Leopold a call. Talk about a guy who can turn some things around who knows how to win. I do think they're going to probably make a run to a bowl here in November.
Virginia, North Carolina. Let's go ACC, Bruce. 2.5. Tar Heels favored. Total in the game is 47. North Carolina, they had their moments early in the year, and the one thing, Virginia stubs their toe. They get some nice wins, and then it's inconsistency on both sides. That's the scary thing. Who do you trust?
Yeah, and watching Virginia here, I'm to the point now, and I'm a little disappointed in the Cavaliers. Just the scheme of this offense is not that good. And I don't think they're utilizing Bryce Perkins, the quarterback, who's a real dual threat, as well as they could either. They don't move him around in the pocket. He's a guy who can do a lot of different things. And it's the game planning and the structure of this offense is poor. Having said that, the defense is still pretty tough. Ranks 11th. This is Bronco Mendenhall. It's a variation of the Rocky Long defense, which is Rocky is Bronco's mentor. And you wonder now if the true freshman quarterback Howell on the North Carolina side might be starting to wobble just a bit. He had his worst game of the season against Duke last week, 10 of 26, 2 picks. They did win that game narrowly over the Blue Devils. But we're going to give Virginia, because of its defense, one more shot this week. 24-19 Cavaliers. Although, hang on to your hats if you're going with these guys, and you got to watch that offense, which I don't think is Perkins all that well.
All right, hey, BYU, Utah State. 3.5 is the consensus. Utah State at home is the favorite. The total in the game is 50. BYU stops the bleeding with a win against Boise State, but how restless are the natives in BYU country?
Oh, they're restless, all right, and so they've got to go up to Logan for this game, and Sataki's job is on the line here in the last month. I think that's pretty apparent. I'm I'm not sure how good Utah State is this year, though. I think they've dropped some. And, I know Gary Anderson's back, and he was the guy who put that thing on course before he left to Wisconsin after 2012. But they look like they've lost something from last year. Now, this is interesting. The quarterback, the backup quarterback for BYU, they're down to their third quarterback. Romney sounds familiar. He'll be a thorn in the Aggie side, much like his uncle Mitt is to Trump. And yes, Mitt is his uncle. But
does he have an alias Twitter account?
Yes, Pierre or whatever. Yeah. But he threw a couple touchdowns in the Boise win. So, let's see what happens here. 28-26 Utah State. This is tight. Don't have a strong field. We did think over 3. We'd maybe give BYU a little look here. And you're right, Sataki, though. That's the other storyline up there. He is under the gun. He's got to win.
Now, weather obviously is a concern for the weekend, so we got to be paying attention to this stuff. If the weather's good, I would say Virginia Tech at Notre Dame 17.5. I like the game to go over the total of 57.5 for a couple of reasons. Virginia Tech, they could put points on the board, but I think Notre Dame, there is the finality of the punch to the gut that they know now. The playoffs are toast and gone. So, if there's a letdown, I think maybe it comes on the defensive side of the ball to the point where I think you can see a lot of points in this game.
Yeah, we do too. We can see this one over as well. Virginia Tech is making a little bit of noise here. Fuente might have found something at quarterback. They've got this redshirt freshman, this big bruiser, Patterson. He's 6'4", 245 pounds. He runs like a freight train. And he had 2 touchdowns on the ground and 122 yards rushing in that recent win over North Carolina before the bye week. So Virginia Tech has turned some things around, and I'm still not sure how great Notre Dame is. They were kind of exposed last week by Michigan. This defense is not as good as some of the best Brian Kelly defenses. We saw Michigan really run roughshod through them last week. And you're right. I mean, the air kind of went out of the balloon for Notre Dame. So schedule-wise, I think this works pretty good here for Virginia Tech. 38-27 Irish, but we're going to take the points and look over with the Hokies.
Oregon, you can make the case they're at least in the discussion again. They've climbed their way back up the rankings, and we've seen significant move here on the home dog. Oregon, a 4.5-point favorite at USC. Total on the game is 62, and I do believe USC was in look-ahead mode last week, and they had to come back from the grave to beat Colorado. But is Oregon walking into a potential hornet's nest here?
Yeah, and I think the Ducks are, Brian, and the last 2 weeks against the Washington schools, games that Oregon could have lost both. They did pull it out, but it took them into the last second against Washington State last week. And this defense, with all the talk about all those big numbers they had, well, when they played teams that couldn't do anything, they shut them down. They've allowed 30-plus the last 2 weeks. And I think SC is going to be able to do some business, especially with Slovis back in there. 4 touchdown passes last week. You're right. That was a big comeback against Colorado when it looked like they were going to be out. So let's give SC a chance here. 34-28 Trojans. That's a Gold Sheet key release.
All right, Bruce. Listen, Kansas State's laying 6. I mean, talk about a mixed bag. Some places 5.5, some places 6, some places 7. Nobody knows what to do with this game. The total on the game is 54. K-State at Kansas. Break up the Jayhawks. Les Miles actually has them, playing some football. And one would think this could be an incredible letdown spot for Kansas State off the Oklahoma game. Or is that just telling you if they can beat Oklahoma? I mean, why would you be jumping all over a Kansas team that you couldn't trust for the last decade?
Yeah, you're right. This is a more interesting game now, way more interesting after what's happened the last couple of weeks. Certainly Kansas State, the big upset last week, and also Kansas. They have turned some things around. They're playing at hyperspeed the last couple of weeks since they switched offensive coordinators. Since Dearman has been promoted, they've been scoring points, 43 per game. Covers the last 2. They beat Texas Tech. So I think there's a chance here that maybe Les Miles has got this thing together. So we're going to give Kansas a shot and catching K-State off the upset. Bill Snyder is also not there to dominate Kansas anymore like he was for the last decade. He won all the last 10. And we're going to give Kansas a shot here. 35-33 slight upset for the Jayhawks.
Hey, I got to ask you about this one real quick. The Army Air Force game, the military academies. Air Force, a good football team, laying 14 and a half. Total in the game is 46. It's been a forgettable season for Army. They lose to San Jose State last week after a couple of great years. This team has, the air's kind of out of the balloon. That being said, it's a President's Trophy game, and do they, forgive the pun, I wasn't even trying to go there, but do they rally the troops?
I don't think so. And they got something else to worry about here because, if Elizabeth Warren or Bernie get into the White House talking about the defense cuts, they're going to go right at Army football if they don't do a little better. No straight up wins the last 4 or covers the last 5.
Well, wait a minute. Come on. You got to. Do you have a joke writer over there? How long have you been waiting to use that line, or how many times have you used that line previously? Because it's a good line.
I've been waiting all year to use it. Listen,
that's hilarious.
Here's the other thing: Air Force is good this year, and they have been seething since they thought the referee stole that game from them last year at Mikey. And they lost that one 17-14. Also, they were really banged up 2 years ago when Army came in here and really bullied them 21-0. Didn't even try a pass that game, but Air Force was really at a low ebb 2 years ago. So the Corps here in Colorado Springs also wants this very badly. And I don't think Air Force eases up either because the way these teams dislike each other. 31-8 Air Force. Army season has come off the rails here. I don't even think they're getting to a bowl. So we'll take Air Force on this one.
All right, how about TCU at Oklahoma State? And TCU, circled the wagons, get the big win last week. They bum rushed the field. Is it a letdown spot, or does Patterson have his guys going in the right direction?
He might, as long as we're going to be past Halloween on Saturday, and let's hope TCU puts away those garish costumes that they wore on Saturday against Texas. Those are the worst uniforms I think I ever saw. But since when do they have red and black and purple? It was really, really awful with that red. Nonetheless, I'm going to assume that was rare aerial success for the Frogs and their quarterback, Duggan, who hadn't looked that good all year. He completed several big passes. More to blame the Texas defense last week, which has really disappeared. Mike Gundy's defense came up with the big plays, including the game-winning pick 6 against Iowa State. We have more faith in their weapons with Hubbard and Sanders to fire the deciding scoring shots here in Stillwater. 31-21. We're going to take Oak State to win this one and set itself up for some interesting games come November here.
All right, Georgia and Florida, Bruce. Obviously, we get some of these big, high-profile rivalry games. Georgia 6.5 on the road. Total on the game ranges from 46 up to 47. The one little thing I would throw out there at 7-1, Florida at number 6 in the country has a very favorable schedule the rest of the way if they can pull off a win here.
Yeah, Florida's still in the hunt for the Final Four. I think more than any other one-loss team right now. Because if Florida wins out, and that would mean beating LSU or Alabama in the SEC title game, I think they're in there. Now, that's easier said than done. And they got to win this one first, and they haven't the last couple of years against Georgia, but they still have a fighting chance. I think they're going to get the first part of that done here. I think Georgia's been a bit of a disappointment this year. I know Jake Fromm has been. He's only got 9 TD passes into November here. Last year he was sitting on 30. He's thrown more interceptions. They don't have as many big plays as they've had the last couple of years out of this offense. He's facing a defense here that really brings pressure from the edge. Todd Grantham's stop unit. I mean, they really had a chance there against LSU a few weeks ago. And their pass defense is pretty good. They have 12 interceptions. That ranks 3rd nationally. As long as Kyle Trask continues his improvement on offense, I think Dan Mullen gets this one. 26-19, Florida. And like I said, win this one. That'll pretty much sew up the SEC East. And November doesn't look nearly as daunting for them. Vanderbilt's coming up next, and then Florida State's down this year. And they can start getting ready for the SEC title game after this week.
All right, we got 3 for the road here. Let's go. Florida State laying 3.5 at home to Miami. Historic, annually great rivalry game. Total on the game is 46.
I don't know what to do with Miami other than if they. I don't want to have to be somewhere where I have to watch them. I had to watch. It was on TV with Pitt when I was in the VSiN studio Saturday doing the show, and had to watch that whole game. They are really hard to watch, but I'm not sure Florida State's much better. They did jump off quick against Syracuse last week. By the way, there's rumors that Willie Taggart might get bought out down there, so we'll see. But I think Miami's defense is kind of gnarly. They may be able to limit Cam Akers here, and Florida State's defense has not been all that dominant this year. And I think probably Manny's going back to Williams at quarterback after N'Kosi Perry looked bad last week. Miami's 4 losses are by a combined 21 points, one of those in overtime, so they're usually pretty close, and I think this one will be as well. 27-26, Florida State, close win, but we're not sure they can lay points against the Canes.
Pretty intriguing game in the Pac-12 with Utah 3.5 on the road at Washington, totals 47.5. The one thing I would say is, how do you see a team respond to adversity after losing to USC? Man, has Utah's D stepped up.
Yes, a ferocious defensive front, and what they did to Arizona State and Cal the last 2 weeks. Now, Cal was playing a third-string quarterback, but still, that was ugly. And you've seen Moss come back, the running back, since he returned from injury. 335 yards rushing the last 3 games, 6 TDs. So you saw how much they missed him while he was out. And Huntley, the quarterback, also back in there from injury, having maybe his best season. He's completed over 73%, 10-1 TD pass interception ratio. So they're not beating themselves. And Washington has managed to beat itself a few times. And this defense is not on the same level as Utah's. Utah is another team that if it'd take a lot of dominoes falling, but the Utes seem to think they still have a shot at the Final Four. They certainly have a shot at the Pac-12 South, but they're going to need somebody to beat USC of all teams. But I think they'll take care of their end of business against the Huskies, who have been kind of disappointing. 26-17 Utes up in Seattle will ride Utah to avenge those 2 losses to Chris Peterson last year.
And I would throw this out there, Bruce. They've been good to me. Had the over last week, and it doesn't mean you do it every week with San Jose State at Army. But Boise State having a terrific season, but then just a heartbreaking loss. Lose the close game to BYU. You get back in conference here against a team that can put points on the board. I'm looking at it. They're betting it under a little bit. I double check what the weather's going to be, but I can see a lot of points in this game. San Jose State's actually been pretty entertaining to watch.
Yeah, they've kept their quarterback Love healthy this year. 15 touchdown passes. They went back to Army and won. That's pretty good. Now San Jose's traveling circus lands back at home. Brief stopover before going to Hawaii. The Hawaii game will be their 5th different game in a 5th different time zone, by the way, next week. But they've played pretty well. They've got hopes to hang in there. Now, we want to see if Bachmeier, the quarterback for Boise, is going to be in there. He was out for the BYU game that they lost. And San Jose's covering some numbers. So I think the big price, and maybe it'll be higher scoring that, like you say, we had a 34-24 Boise, but we could up that score a little bit. But I think the better angle is just taking points.
Okay. There you go. Fantastic information. It's a great publication, The Gold Sheet. We have a great time getting you ready for another weekend of college football. Brian Blessing with Bruce Marshall. Bruce, thanks, bud. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com, and reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling, an approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.